Hello, this is Billy Core from the Nostalgia Mall, and today, August 24th, 2025, unless you're watching early on Patreon or YouTube members, marks 30 years since my favorite operating system was released. Windows 95. And today we're going to be taking a look back at the history of Windows 95, as well as taking a look at what made it so special. We'll also be hearing from some fellow vintage computer YouTubers who will share their favorite memories of Windows 95. So sit back, relax, or not, I don't really care what you do, and enjoy this retrospective of Windows 95 and what made it so special. I suppose the story of Windows 95 begins 10 years prior in 1985 with the release of Windows 1.0. The first version of Windows to be released. Now, I hope you weren't like me and thought that Windows 3.1 was the first version of Windows, because until I found that out back in 2005, I was stupid. Anyway, this version of Windows didn't really amount to much, as you can probably imagine. You had your MS-DOS Executive, which was the modern equivalent of today's Start menu in Windows Explorer, along with very basic programs like
the MS-DOS Executive, an appointment calendar, a card file, a notepad, a clock, a control panel, a terminal, a print spooler, a RAM driver, and, can you believe it, Reversi!
Microsoft released two more versions of Windows, including Windows 2.0 and 3.0, the latter of which introduced the Program Manager interface. But the first version of Windows I ever used, and I imagine a lot of you used as well, was Windows 3.1, released in 1992. This is considered by many to be the first real version of Windows. Now, we've looked at Windows 3.1 many times on the Nostalgia Mall throughout the years, but to understand the huge transition that Windows 95 brought, let's take one more look at what Windows 3.1 was like. Okay, so here's one of my computers running Windows 3.1. This is a Packard Bell Legend 994 CDT with a Pentium 133. And this computer would have originally shipped with Windows 3.1 or 95. It just depends on when in 1995 you purchased this computer. But just for the sake of history, we're going to start off by showing it running Windows 3.1, and we're going to take a look at what it was like using Windows 3.1 along with some of its quirks. Now, even though I'm saying Windows 3.1, this is technically Windows for Workgroups 3.11, but for me it's just easier to say Windows 3.1, so that's what we're going to go with. And so when you start Windows 3.1, this is what you're greeted with, the Program Manager. And this is the predecessor to what we now consider to be the Start menu, because this is where all your programs are, and they're listed in program groups. So we'll open the Accessories group, and here's all your accessories like Windows Write, Paintbrush, the calculator, and much more goodies than that. And you got other program groups that are created by software you install. For instance, here's the Sierra Online group. And these are what eventually became the program groups on Windows 95. And later, of course. And this is what the desktop was like. You can see the icons on here are programs that are already running. In this case, it would be After Dark and the Program Manager. You can't make shortcuts or anything, or any documents or anything. You can't put them on this desktop. That didn't come along until Windows 95. So, yeah, this was a very different experience back then. And one big difference, we'll go back to Windows Write, and we will type up a document. And we'll try to save it. We'll save it to the C director, through the directory here. And we'll try to name it like Packard Bell, Windows 3.1. And notice it says this file name is not valid. Well, that's because this is running on top of MS-DOS, which, as you know, these 16-bit operating systems have a 8-character limit on file names. So instead we have to name it something like PB131, which for a lot of people would be a lot more confusing and a lot less straightforward, and I believe that Mac OS at the time was able to do long file names. So yeah, Windows at this time was a little bit more primitive in this regard. And one thing that is a little different about Windows 3.1, we'll just load up a game that would have been popular at the time, Myst. And to launch the program, you have to find the Broderbund directory and double-click the icon here, which isn't too difficult, really. But Windows 95 made this process, even this process, a lot easier, which we'll look at shortly. We'll put the CD aside for when we switch over to 95. And one thing that was also different back in these days, instead of Windows Explorer, you had the File Manager, which was, I guess, very similar to what Windows Explorer would eventually do, but still a little bit more convoluted. And like I said earlier, this runs on top of MS-DOS, so when you exit Windows, instead of giving you a "it's now safe to shut down your computer" screen, or even better, shutting off automatically, you get dropped down to a MS-DOS prompt. Now, this computer, being a Packard Bell put in a few things to make life a little easier for folks, including booting straight into Windows when the computer starts up. But on a lot of people's Windows 3.1 computers, they had to manually go into Windows themselves. Wouldn't boot up automatically into it, so when you would turn the computer on and you get to the C prompt, you'd have to type in WIN, enter, and it would go into Windows. Unless you did like Packard Bell and add the win command to the end of autoexec.bat. But a lot of casual users probably wouldn't have done that. And so there you have it, that's Windows 3.1. In 1992, Microsoft began development on their next version of Windows, codenamed Chicago, which would later be named Windows 95. Throughout the 3 years of development, the look and feel of the OS changed dramatically, as you can see in these screenshots. Some of my favorites are of the earliest builds that have this very primitive start button. It looks like neither Windows 3.1 or Windows 95. I also like the later 1994 builds where it began to look like Windows 95, but not quite. Finally, 1995 came, and with it, Windows 95, along with a huge celebration. On its release on August 24th, coincidentally just one day after I started kindergarten, Microsoft held celebrations around the world. The Empire State Building in New York City was lit to match the colors of the Windows logo. The CN Tower in Toronto, Canada had a Windows 95 banner hung across the side, as well as Microsoft paying for 1.5 million issues of London's The Times newspaper. The then host of NBC's Tonight Show, Jay Leno, was at the launch party along with Bill Gates, making his typical quips, comparing the computer mouse cord to a mouse's tail, and comparing the taskbar to the US president. So, why all the hype? Why was Windows 95 such a big deal? Well, for what seems like the millionth time on this channel, which is not a bad thing, let's take a closer look at what made Windows 95 so great. Alright, let's turn the computer back on. I've got my Windows 95 CF card in here. And I'm going to show the boot up process this time just to show you how much more convenient it was compared to Windows 3.1. First we've got to go through the power on self-test. And one of the reasons I'm using this computer here, the 994 CDT, there it is right there, is simply because this was one of the nicest computers you could have gotten in 1995 to come with Windows 95 when it first came out. I mean, Pentium 133, that was really good. It was good stuff. You see, it blocks out most of the DOS stuff. Of course, you do have to log into the network if you have a network card like I do. And there's the famous Microsoft sound created by Brian Eno, ironically on a Macintosh, I believe. But this is the Windows 95 desktop. Already you can tell this is a huge leap from Windows 3.1. Look at all these shortcuts you're able to add. And other icons, like we can add our own, let's say, Microsoft Word document, and take a look at this. Packard Bell Windows 95 document. And that is way more than 8 characters, and it is more than happy to do that for us. So, there you go. Much easier file naming schemes now. And of course, the big thing people were talking about when Windows 95 came out was the Start button and Start menu. Click here to begin. And this gives you access to most of all you would need to do on a computer. And look at all these. These are the same program groups you would have seen in the Windows 3.1 Program Manager, but in a much more convenient way. Like we can open Microsoft Paint, and this look and feel of Microsoft Paint pretty much remained the same into the 2000s, so that's kind of cool. Okay, let's load up Mist once again, because there were certain programs that were a little bit more enhanced for Windows 95 with something called Auto Run. Instead of having to start it from the Start menu or Program Manager, you would get a little program that would come up as soon as you put the disk in the drive. Like, for instance, this one for Mist with the Broderbund logo. And you just click Run. Okay, so in this case, this must have been a bad example because it's not loading. Well, it kind of loaded. I think this is just a QuickTime issue, so we'll just close out of that, but at least we still got to see the auto run menu. And with Windows 95 came much more powerful computer games, such as Monster Truck Madness. We'll load that up because this will be a good example. A little loud.
Get ready. Go.
This kind of game really wouldn't have been possible on Windows 3.1. This is a full 32-bit game. Also, during the days of Windows 3.1, my apologies, also during the days of Windows 95, you saw the introduction of 3D accelerator video cards like the 3D Effects Voodoo cards, all of which would have greatly enhanced this game. Of course, this Packard Bell doesn't have one. But yeah, once Windows 95 came out, yeah, this really unleashed the potential that personal computers had. Doesn't really unleash the potential I have for playing games properly. Like I said, I'm not. I love these games, but I'm not good at them. And Windows 95, despite being its own thing, still technically runs on top of DOS. It just does things differently. Double click this, we can go into real DOS. And this is DOS 7. Of course, when you do VER, it comes up as Windows 95. And you can still play all your favorite MS-DOS games from back in the day just fine on Windows 95, such as and you could also play these within Windows as well, actually. And perhaps one of the most important things about Windows 95 was at the time it came out, this was when the internet was first starting to become a thing. And certain versions of Windows, especially if you got a Packard Bell that was pre-installed with it, came with early versions of Internet Explorer. Infamously, I guess you could say. Now this is a later version of Internet Explorer that came out like a year later, I guess, in 1996. This is version 3, and this is hooked up to the proto web. You can get live weather forecasts on here. This is kind of how what the internet looked like when Windows 95 was new. Of course, I didn't really use Internet Explorer when we got our first computer because instead we used America Online, as you can see right here, which just shut off its dial-up service, unfortunately. But I think there are ways you can get this going again through your LAN. So yeah, that's Windows 95, and of course when you shut it down, if you have a really fancy computer, it'll turn off automatically. If not, you have to do it yourself, but you get this nice little message. While Windows 95 was succeeded by Windows 98 in 1998, Windows 95 is still looked back upon by being what put the personal computer on the map in the mid-1990s. The interface introduced with Windows 95 is still not too far off from what we now have on Windows 11, for better or worse, only ever deviating in 2012 with the release of Windows 8, which I think is better left in the past. Windows 95, despite its quirks, is remembered very fondly by many all these 30 years later. Let's pause and remember some of these memories we cherish.
Hi folks, TheFlyingScotsman here. Firstly, I'd like to thank Billy for having me on this video. What are my first memories of Windows 95? Well, the very first memory I think I had of Windows 95 was when I was in a shop in the centre of town as a young child. I think the shop was Dixon's. Now, Dixon's, for those of you who don't know, were an electronics and appliances shop that used to be on the high street. They would sell they would sell household electricals like, cookers, washing machines, dishwashers, vacuum cleaners, whatnot. But they would also sell things like TVs and, computers, games consoles. And, of course, they had a few floor models to, for people to have a look at. Now, I was stood in front of a floor model of what I believe to be a Compact Presario 2200. And that machine was equipped with some pretty powerful speakers at the time. Now, back then, what shops would do is they would have the computers running with a password-protected screensaver. So, me being a young child, I did what I would have always done at that particular time when faced with a piece of technology. I'd start jabbing at buttons and, like wiggling the mouse, trying to use it and, seeing what it could do. Now, because it was a password-protected screensaver, all I got was that. That thing. The very first dialog box I ever saw in Windows 95. So, yeah. And I don't know if the sound's going to play, but obviously, because I didn't have the password, I'll have just been tapping away at the keyboard, hit enter, and immediately gotten a flag when the Windows 95 chord sound played out of those speakers. Yeah, frightened the life out of me. But the first chance I got to use Windows 95 properly was actually at school. But it wasn't actually until the beginning of 1998. And the first time I got to use it was actually in maths. Because I had a machine that I really liked to use. It was a Olivetti, I think it was a 386. And, I always used to have banter with my maths teacher, about this particular computer, because the other machine he had up to that point, he was saying, oh, that's better. And I was like, nah, the Olivetti's better. But one day, he was, I think, literally pleading with me. He was like, Jay, please don't use this one. It is just really, really bad. Please don't use the Olivetti. So, I said, okay, well, can I use the Windows 95 machine instead? And he was like, yeah, okay then. So he set me up on this machine, this new, shiny new Microma. I remember everything. I remember everything about it. I remember like the way that the hard disk click sounded, and I remember what the display looked like, what the machine itself looked like, and I just kind of fell in love with the machine. And of course, because I'd never used 95 before, there was no program manager. There was just there was icons on the desktop, even though nothing was open. You had the start button, you had the taskbar, and I remember the first time I ever used it, he didn't have Office installed on it, so he set me up with something called WordPad to do my work in. Now, obviously, we know WordPad, you go Start, Programs, Accessories, and WordPad. For some reason at the time I decided to call it WordPlot. So, you can imagine, there's me. Excellent. I'm on a new computer. Oh, happy. Anyway, so there's me doing my maths work. And, time to save it. So, go to save. It defaults to the desktop. Now, the sheets we were doing at the time were originally issued as homework sheets. So that's what they were called until the maths teacher changed the name to Brickwork. So, of course, I typed in homework. And, of course, this is where I thought it was really magical, because to me, that little icon right there looked like a piece of homework. So I was just like, wow, it's drawn a piece of homework. That's what it is. I typed homework. So there you go. My childlike brain probably thought, well, with, in knowing what we know in 2025, I guess my childhood brain probably thought that there was, DALL-E installed inside this computer and it was able to draw up icons based on what you called it. Now, obviously, because I thought that this was generating images, depending on what I'd saved it as, I was like, okay, let's try this again. Let's go save as, and we're going to type maths, and, it'll show a sheet of maths, surely. No. No, it didn't. But I genuinely loved the way Windows 95 worked, the way it looked, the buttons are a bit more square, the 3D look of it, it reminded me of Microsoft Publisher at the time, which was, one of the other programs I'd used that had, like, toolbars and, a 3D look about it, or Microsoft Office or something like that. I preferred WordPad to write. I mean, I did not mind using WordPad, and, I was quite happy to, I was using WordPad to even do some basic desktop publishing, because, want to put a picture, insert, object, bitmap image, and there we go. You can draw a little picture, and, you got text, you've got pictures, and you've even got the different colors. So look at that. You can have colored text. You can have pictures. It just seemed like such a jump up from Windows 3.1. And of course, as more computers got Windows 95, I realized that you could actually save with long file names. So I used to do that. I remember one time, I think I saved a piece of work as work for Mr. Green, because if I don't do it, then I will get into trouble and he will give me detention and that will make me unhappy. Or something along those lines. Look at that long file name. Earlier version of Internet Explorer, what I liked is that you got a wee icon on the desktop that said the internet. Now, okay, that's a bit misleading if you want to use Netscape, but if you sat yourself down in front of your Windows 95 computer and it had been set up to go online, but you didn't know what to do, I want to go on the internet, where do I go? Oh, look, there it is. The internet. And you double click on that and boom, you're online. You're on the internet. Absolutely fantastic. I remember the second time actually I used Mr. Bentley's Windows 95 computer. He'd put Microsoft Office on it and he changed the color scheme to this high contrast black. And I couldn't deal with it, man. It was just, Word 6 looked too busy and I was getting really quite, confused. I was feeling a bit I was tied up in it, and so I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to shut it down, okay, because I know how this goes. I can drop down to DOS and then start it back up, and nobody will be any the wiser. So what do? Start, shut down. Oh, do you want to shut down your computer? Yes, I want to shut down my computer because it'll drop me down to DOS. Oh no! It's now safe to turn off your computer. I don't want to do that. I don't want the teachers to see that. Well, quick, where's the reset button? Oh no. So then I had to go and restart the darn machine. And, and I guess that was the first time I ever got to see Windows 95 start up and realize that you didn't have to type win at the DOS prompt to get it or anything like that. I think other things that I liked about Windows 95, 3D Maze screensaver. Oh yes, thank you very much. The OpenGL screensavers in general, they always used to distract me in class. I always used to love watching them like on the school machines. And, just kind of things like that. In fact, the first computer we got ran Windows 95. It was the Compact Presario 2240. And I've got to say, I absolutely fell in love with Windows 95 at the time. So that's about it. So thank you once again, Billy, for having me on this video.
Yeah. Billy, what's going on, dude? Yeah, it's Clint from LGR here, in case some of y'all aren't aware. I just am a person that does computer videos on my channel, and Windows 95 is such a common topic and is such a deeply nostalgic thing. Anything from the 90s, really. But 95 in particular, like it's dead in the middle of it, and everything about that particular release of Windows was just the most exciting possible thing at the time. I was absolutely obsessed with the idea of moving on from not just DOS, but 3.1. As much as I enjoyed my Packard Bell 486, running Windows 3.1 and DOS 5, every time I got a chance to try out 95 at like Office Depot or Best Buy or whatever, it was just blown away. Like, oh my goodness, start menu, having these kind of shortcuts just laid out on the desktop there, and being able to run DOS things so easily from within it. And of course, all the new gaming possibilities. And then later on, DirectX, Direct3D and everything was, was just crazy. And also the fact that just 3D gaming things were coming along at the same time as 95, it made it extremely extra exciting. CD-ROM, sound capabilities exploding, and then soon the whole 3D acceleration, all that was all Windows 95 era stuff, at least for me. I got my first Windows 95 PC at the very end of 1997, so it took me a little bit to get onto that train at home. But yeah, at friends' houses, my uncle's house, any possible time I can get some Windows 95 action, I was all for it. And it was just, I don't know, I guess that was the first time I really felt like something was, like the future was happening in front of me, and it was real time. It was taking off. Of course, the internet at the same time was just starting to really come into the mainstream. And yeah, Internet Explorer just seemed like some magical thing. Like it was a portal to another world right there. I mean, Netscape as well. I started off with Netscape, but yeah, something about having the internet sort of built into your operating system was so appealing to me at the time. Forgetting any kind of Microsoft problems, they got themselves into trouble with that. But yeah, I don't know really what it is about 95. I still love going back to it. Particular preference is going to be 98 SE, of course, just because of the usability and stability and other improvements that we've got. But just going back to the simplicity of 95 even. I can't believe it's been 30 years. I've been messing with Windows 95 for 30 years, and it just doesn't really get old. And yeah, even though I don't go to it nearly as often as like 98, I guess it's kind of remains special that way. Because yeah, I really don't use 95 as much, so it has kind of remained that enjoyable side activity every so often for 30 years. Really more like 25 years, I guess, because it already started feeling very retro by the early 2000s, which is strange because so much more time has passed since then. But so many more technologies come and go and operating systems come and go. But yeah, Windows 95 was like, not timeless, but of its time and yet futuristic. I don't know. I've got a lot of rambling thoughts here in case you can't tell. Anyway, I don't really know what else to say here except that I absolutely loved 95, and the whole experience of it was just intoxicating to me as a kid. 9 years old, I guess, when that came out. And yeah, it's just one of those things that will never leave my brain. And everything from the startup sound effect to the whole aesthetic of that UI. I sometimes still wish modern operating systems looked as simple and usable and friendly, sort of, as 95 did. Even though I'm a Mac OS person now, primarily Mac and Linux stuff, but yeah, 95, that's where it's at. Hope that's some useful footage for you. Thanks for asking me to be on the channel.
Thank you so much, Jay and LGR, for sharing your memories here. And now for some of my memories of Windows 95. I think my earliest memory of it happened one evening in, I think, late August or early September of 1995. That Wednesday night, my uncle was driving me to his house while my mom was at choir practice at church, which was a ritual that was very common at that time. And as you know, my aunt owned a Gateway 2000 P5-100XL that she had gotten that spring, which was the first computer I ever saw or used. And now her computer ran Windows 3.1, which was still the current OS when she got it. But she was interested in upgrading it. When we got to their house, my uncle asked me to ask my aunt if she had gotten Windows 95 yet. Now, she didn't upgrade until early 1996, but that was the first time for me I'd ever heard of Windows 95. And on December 5th, 1995, my dad brought home our family's first computer, a Packard Bell Legend 822 CDT, which came pre-installed with Windows 95. And this was the first time I ever got to use Windows 95, and I was fascinated with it. But at the same time, I wanted it to be more like my aunt's Gateway 2000 because that was the first computer I ever used, and I just assumed that's what all computers would look like. I remember not long after getting the Packard Bell, we were in the computer section at Montgomery Ward at Carolina Circle Mall, and I saw a copy of Windows 3.1 for sale amongst all the software. I asked my dad if we could get it and install it on the new Packard Bell, which he obviously said no to. Looking back, that would have been a terrible, terrible idea because of drivers and having to have our own copy of MS-DOS, which we didn't have. But very soon, I did come to enjoy using Windows 95, along with all the games that were designed for it, like Earthworm Jim, Firefight, and Monster Truck Madness. Windows 95 remained our main OS until we upgraded to an HP Pavilion running Windows 98 in 1999. And time passed, and in 2005, when I was 15 years old, the 90s nostalgia bug bit me. And I needed a Windows 95 computer to play old games and relive the past on. I bought my first vintage computer that year, the Packard Bell Legend 1510 Supreme, which I still have, running Windows 95, which was a 9-year-old OS at that time. Thanks to that computer, though, I was able to look at Windows 95 with a much more mature and experienced eye, learning how the OS worked and experiencing stuff that we didn't have in 1995. Well, at least my family didn't, like Plus for Windows 95 and Office for Windows 95. Now, 20 years later, I now have more computers running Windows 95 than I do Windows 11, and I still find the OS fascinating. As convenient as the active desktop interface is on Windows 98, I still prefer the more simple Windows 95 interface and just the entire culture of the computer world in the mid-90s. I mean, it was just so different back then and at the same time so exciting because everything was new and fresh. You'd walk into a store like CompUSA or Circuit City, and there would just be rows and rows of big box software and all this exciting new computer equipment, stuff that just isn't exciting anymore these days. I mean, you go into those stores now and they barely have software for sale. You have to download everything now, but that's just the way things are these days. So I thank you, Windows 95, for all the fun and memories that you provided, and I hope all of you enjoyed this 30-year retrospective, and thank you for watching. This is Billy Core, signing off. Thank you for visiting the Nostalgia Mall. If you liked what you saw, please like, subscribe, and follow me on Facebook and X. You may also support me on Patreon if you'd like. Until next time, this is Billy Core, signing off.